You can't change the reality that you were born into. You can't change anything that's happened in the past, but you can effectually change anything that you want moving forward, and you can live the most magnificent life. Successful people learn how to make their mind work for them. I'm David Nagel, and this is the Successful Mind Podcast. Anybody who's been following this podcast for some time probably has dealt with the idea of being stuck in their life or their business at some point in time, or you know somebody that has. And if whether you have or you know somebody that has, this might be an episode that you want to pass along and have them listen to. I want to talk a little bit about the idea that our power to choose, to make it to make a decision, to actually choose, and why it's so great, and how do we actually get unstuck in our life. I was listening to somebody the other night describe what it's like to be depressed, to have not a lot of aim in life, to talk about going through various different changes and really struggling with the lack of accomplishment, kind of reflecting back over their life after they had gotten older, and started thinking along the lines of, if I had made a different choice, if I had chose to create a different life for myself, where would I actually be in my life? And I was thinking about it, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting kind of an exercise to do, because we could probably do it at any point in our life. All you have to do is take a look at where you are right now and ask yourself this question. If, say, 20 years ago or 50 years ago, where depending on whatever your age is, if I had made a different decision to become somebody different than who I am today, where would I be? What could I have experienced? What would I have done? What would my accomplishments be? What would my failures have been? What kinds of people could I have known and met and learned from? And I think one of the reasons why this is an interesting idea is, at any point in time, even the most successful person could look back at their life and go, I wonder what it would have been like if I hadn't chose to been an uber successful business person, if I went back and just decided to be an average employee for someone and maybe a mom and a dad, what that experience would have been like. Or any variation on that, or numerable amount of options that a person could think of what they could have done with their life. But then I come to realize this, that in this moment, there's a bit of a wake up to the person that is reflecting back, and we can realize that we actually have the power to change whatever situation that we're in right now, unless you're dying or something, but in many cases that can even be changed to some degree. The idea that by choosing something different, we can affect the outcome and our way of being in the moment. Now, I totally understand what it's like to be stuck. I was really, really stuck at one point in my life. And when I say stuck, I think that I want to also throw into that pot, if you will, the idea of a lack of intellectual knowledge, where the more knowledge itself would have allowed me the ability to have greater options, because there's more things to choose around. Emotionally stuck, in a sense that whatever the story is that I was telling myself at the time, which was very much a victimized story, had me in a poor me situation. Look what the world has done to me. Look what how other people have wronged me. and look at the situation that I'm in. And then this kind of a physical attitude of just putting on a face every day and kind of pretending that I was okay with the way that life was to a certain degree. And I think that was probably, I think it was true in every area of my life. And the truth of the matter was that I was just flat out miserable. There were things in my life that I was happy about. But it really had no direction, and it was very much a point in which I was searching for some kind of direction. Now, really take into consideration your situation. Maybe you are suffering with depression. Maybe you're suffering with psychological dysfunction. Maybe you have had real trauma in your life. Maybe you have been victimized in some horrific way. Maybe you did not have the greatest parents in the world, or the education, or being able to know people, or financial resources to be able to do something different. Any one of those things, or a combination, a person can sit back and they can literally create a story about where they are, how they got there, all the things that went wrong, be completely victimized by it. We can then begin to create individuals around us that will agree with it. I think that if there's anything that shows to be true in the history of the world, is that any person can basically find people to agree with whatever their narrative about life is and support them in that narrative. And it's a very dangerous thing, because if you're depressed, if you're feeling self-pity, if you're directionless in life, there's a whole bunch of people out there that you could surround yourself with that are experiencing the same thing. And you'll sit around and talk about how bad everything is. And then generally what happens is that we pick one thing or a few things to blame it on. And we could blame it on the government, and we could blame it on rich people. We could blame it on bad parents. We could blame it on crime. We could, if you're politically active or intrigued, you could blame it on the left, or you could blame it on the right, or you could blame it on the middle. Like, there are so many things that we can blame our situation on. If you're a vet and you suffered horrific experiences in one of the wars, maybe you were disabled, in combat. Maybe you have psychological trauma because of what it is that you experienced. That can be the defining story of your life. And all of this can hold you right where you are, at best have you managing the way that your life is going, and the inevitable outcome is that we all die. I don't say that to sound dark, but the truth is that's where everybody's headed. The great leveler in life is death. So the idea is basically this, that the human spirit, the human will, is really designed to do something extremely spectacular in life, something that is groundbreaking, that's earth-moving, that is soul-stirring, that intrigues the imagination and causes us to want to be creative and expressive and heard and communicative with our fellow humans, to experience the joys of that, to share it with loved ones, to leave a mark in the world that you did something positive, to be your own hero in your own journey, creating it as you will it throughout your lifetime. And if you're in a place where that does not seem possible, that's really the epitome of being stuck. It really doesn't matter what the story is. Everybody has a story. And I remember hearing when I heard that, the first time that I heard that everybody has a story, it really didn't matter what your story was. I thought, oh, how insensitive is that? Like, what kind of bullshit is that? And the reason that I thought that was because I was coming from inside of my story. And when you're inside of the story that you're telling yourself, everything seems extraordinarily real, emotional. You see where all of the different particular things that are in the story, how they're working against you to keep you where you are. How all of the different people are somehow in cahoots with each other to prevent you from moving along, or the damage that was done to you in some way, is keeping you in a place where you don't have access to something that could help you because other people are more fortunate. It really doesn't matter what that narrative is. It's very, very real for the person that's experiencing it. But until the person can hear another message, they are pretty much doomed to stay on that path for the rest of their life. Something different has to come in, or they have to let something different come in to their consciousness that causes them to start to ask a bit of a different question that will ultimately lead to the ability to make a different decision. So I'm kind of hoping that in some way, for some people out there, this episode of the Successful Mind podcast might be that for you. So let's start with the idea that you're stuck in a story and that it doesn't matter. And let me explain this a little bit. Everybody on the planet, no matter how well they're doing or how bad they're doing, or anyone anywhere in the middle, is basically telling themselves a story about their whole life, including myself. The idea that I'm sitting in our podcast studio in North Carolina and I am recording this episode of this podcast. If somebody was to start interviewing me and ask me how I got here, I would tell you a story. It's a story of my own creation. It's a story of how I got from one place to another. It's a story that if I continue to tell this story, I will end up in a specific destination, period. That's it. And it's mine. And I was the one that created it. And all the people that are in my story are participants in my story. There are many people out there where I'm a participant in their story. Some are known, some are unknown. Every one of you has people that are in your story. They're participants in your story, and you are also a participant in their story to whatever degree that plays out. So there's, 7.5 billion people on the planet at the time of this recording, and every one of them has a story. If the story was the be-all, end-all of a person's life, there would be no progress forward by mankind at all. We would completely stay stuck in our education, our awareness, our technology, any advancement. And you wouldn't just stay stuck there. You would start going backwards. We would start regressing because there's only two directions in life, forward and backward. Things are either growing or they're disintegrating. It's either moving towards life or it's moving towards death. There is no middle where everything just stays the same. So when a person is telling themselves a story, one of the things that they should really ask themselves is this story moving me forward in my life, or is it some attempt to just stay the same because I have a fear of going forward and I also have a fear of looking backward, trying to resolve anything that may have happened in my life. So I'm just telling this story over and over again to anybody who will listen in an attempt not to be afraid to do anything else. All the people on the planet have a story. And the interesting thing, I think, about this story is that we're choosing it. And that's very important. It's very important to begin to understand, to begin to think about in your mind that every bit, every little bit, every detail of your life is a story that you're choosing. And that it doesn't matter what it is, you can effectually change that by choosing to start telling yourself a different story. So it can start off with something as simple, but they usually have some quite some depth to it and some reality behind it, as the mere details of why you are where you are and how other people have played a role in that for yourself and how you're experiencing that from an emotional perspective. Now, here's what's fascinating about this part. You may not be able to change what somebody else did. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, even if I tell myself a different story, it doesn't change what this person did. True. That's true. It also doesn't change anything that you've ever done. But what it changes is how you're showing up in the now, in today, so that sets up a new cause moving forward, which allows you to create a new story. And all stories in one way or another are created out of some story that we've told in the past. Even if it's just as simple or factual that we really get tired telling ourselves that story and we're going to drop it and we're going to tell a new one. The creation of the new in that scenario came out of the dissatisfaction or the displeasure of the old, and then we decided that we wanted to move forward. But in either case, the idea is that we have to wake up to the fact that we have the choice. We have the ability to choose, the magnificent power of choice, so that we can start creating a new story and, in effect, create a new reality around us instantaneously. And then we can begin to build upon that as we move forward. So if you're stuck, if you don't like the situation that you're in, it may seem really ridiculous to you that by telling yourself a new story that anything at all is actually going to change in your life. But consider this and consider this really well. When you start to change the story that you're telling yourself, let's say somebody hurt you in some way. It could be a parent, it could be a predator, it could be a government, it could be a war, it could be society, a teacher, a clergy, it doesn't matter. Somebody hurt you in some way. By telling yourself a different story about it, you change your position in the story. So you begin to change the narrative that how the narrative is actually affecting you. You could go from this person or thing did something terrible and it hurt me in some way and I was affected by it terribly in some way, and here's the situation that I'm in right now. And then in our mind, what we start to tell ourselves in the form of a story is that I'm going to need something else. I'm going to need more money. I'm going to need more time. I'm going to need different people. I'm going to need justice. I'm going to need revenge. I'm going to need something that it will allow me to move beyond this story and create something completely different in my life. The only thing that we need is the desire not to be living in the story that we're currently telling ourselves. And we have to understand that the decision to change our story is something that has to come first. Not the opportunity to move out of it. It's the decision to change the story that moves us into the new opportunity. Until you start making a decision to change the story, effectually using your power to choose, to make a change, to start repeatedly telling yourself something different that is more proactively. Even if you're telling yourself a story that is completely not true, like it doesn't have to be based in the reality that you're experiencing right now. But the self-talk, the way that we think on a regular basis, if we start to repeat a new story, a new way of thinking over and over and over again, something fantastic begins to happen in a person's life. And that is that they start to see things differently. Because the story that we're telling ourselves over and over again is literally controlling our perception. So if you tell yourself a doom and gloom story long enough, you will engulf your entire life in that doom and gloom. Before you know it, everywhere that you look will reflect doom and gloom. You'll see what's wrong with everything. You'll see what's wrong with every person. You'll see all different kinds of things not to trust and why people are bad and why the world is going to hell. You'll just see terrible things everywhere. You'll also experience the emotion of that, which is fear, anxiety, depression. It'll express itself in all kinds of dysfunction and neuroses. That's where people start doing things to numb out, whether it's drinking or drugs or overeating or poor behavior, whatever it is that a person's doing as a conclusion based on whatever story that they're telling themselves. Because we tell the story for a certain period of time, and then what we do is we feel like shit about it, but then we start doing some behavior that really isn't the behavior of the character that our higher self wants to be, but because of the story, we now somehow justify that in our mind that it's okay. And it's interesting because we'll also have to bring everybody else around us in on that story. If they're not part of the story, they generally become an enemy in some way. So the whole idea around this is that if we start telling ourselves a new story based on what we would ultimately like our life to be, if you start talking about the things that you want in your life, even if you don't have them, if you start talking about the people you'd like to experience in your life, even if you haven't met them, if you start talking about the direction that you'd like to go, even if you don't have the first step or the roadmap to get there, you literally change your perception on what you begin to see and perceive in the world. And before you know it, doors start opening right in front of you, meaning that you start to see little glimpses of opportunity for change that start to show up in your life. And, of course, the truth of the matter is that those things are already there. They're there for everybody, but the story is controlling our perception, so we can't actually see those things. We can't perceive them. But as we change that story, we can then begin to perceive opportunities to be, do, and have different things in our life right now in the moment. And then we have to make the next choice, which is the choice to walk through the doors of those opportunities that are in our life. As we begin to walk through them, we begin to see more. We start to make a link, a connection in our mind that by speaking what it is that we want and what we desire to have, instead of talking about what we actually don't want, which is all of the old story, step by step by step, we will pull ourselves out of any situation that we're in. I have watched people who are or claim to be horribly depressed. They're on medication, and working with them in a short period of time, helping them find a goal that is spectacular in their life, something that just excites the hell out of them, when previously they would sit and tell me, I can't think of anything that excites me. Nothing seems fun. I'm totally down. I've literally watched that change. By changing the rules in which they tell themselves a story and have it backed up by the factual reality that they're living in, and allowing them to break those rules in their mind, I've watched amazing change with people that have been basically told by even some professionals that they would be on medication for the rest of their life, or this was the best that they could hope for in their life. Maybe it was a medical condition or some kind of a disability. There's always enough facts to back up whatever perception we're experiencing as our reality. But it is basically a minefield to get blown up on. I mean, it is one rabbit hole after another, And if we continue to go down it, it's like it multiplies, it gets worse, and we stay further stuck in that story. And in the extreme cases, with those kinds of stories, that's where we see things such as suicide, or we see mass school shootings, or the killing of other individuals. Like it is a terrible, terrible road for any person to begin to head down. If we can understand, if as a society, if we could begin to understand how much and how important it really is to guard the gate in our mind as to what we allow into that beautiful garden, that jewel that is our mind, we will understand that by our choice of what we let in and what we keep out, we create the reality around us that we want. You can't change the reality that you were born into. You can't change anything that's happened in the past, but you can effectually change anything that you want moving forward, and you can live the most magnificent life. And I really believe that everybody on the planet is here to do something completely spectacular in their own life, in their own way of living, in the experiences that they want to have for themselves and for others. But this will never happen if we don't understand that I don't care how dire the circumstance is that you're finding yourself in right now, you in this moment can make a decision to choose to think something different. You can. You can choose to think something different. You may say to yourself, what the hell am I going to think that's different when all of this is going on in my life? You can bring in ideas of gratitude. Maybe you don't actually experience gratitude right now in the moment, but start contemplating what would happen if I was grateful for everything. What is the possibility of good that I would see that could come out of the horrific things that I've experienced, the terrible losses that I have witnessed or felt in my life? You will be amazed at the things that begin to show up, because they're already here and you're training your mind to perceive something completely different. Everything is here all the time in the same space at the same time. And we get to experience one or the other based on how we choose to have that experience. Work your way into something spectacular. Find something in your life that will excite the hell out of you. I don't care what it is. Don't get stuck on I have to know how to do it. Start to dream again. Start allowing your mind to go down a road of what if anything is possible? What could I create in my life? And then once you get on that road, don't ever get off. Remember, whichever way you travel on that road, it's your choice. Make a new choice today. Thanks for listening to the Successful Mind podcast. And if you like what you heard and you want to know more, go to davidnagel.com/free stuff.